Hi, my name is Noah Bauer, and I'm a licensed minister in the Foursquare Church, as well as a seminary student at Duke Divinity School. Today's topic, I'd like to talk about the Bible's position on monarchy and how that should inform our politics. Within this video, I do not seek to provide a definitive formulation of how a Christian should operate in the modern political realm. There are already many who have attempted to do such a thing, but I do not believe that providing a definitive position on this is even helpful. Rather, my aim is to paint a picture about the Bible's position on the Israelite monarchy and invite you to apply these principles in our current situation. With that disclaimer in place, let us jump into the biblical text. Now, the first place I'd like to take us is Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 through 20. Before analyzing Deuteronomy proper, it is important to take into account its context. Now, Deuteronomy functions as the retelling of the Torah that the Lord gave to Moses on Mount Sinai, but this time for an exilic context. Now, although Deuteronomy is literally placed before Joshua, it was most likely written after the events found in Joshua through Kings historically happened. Rather than providing a law for the kings of Israel to follow, Deuteronomy aims to show how Israelites fell short of God's law, ultimately causing them to go into exile. Now, Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 20 starts out by saying, "When you come into the land that the Lord God is giving you, you shall possess it and dwell in it. Then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations around me." Within this verse, there are two interesting things to note. First, the Deuteronomist, that is, the writer of Deuteronomy, asserts that it is the people asking for a king rather than God telling them they need it. Now, elsewhere in Deuteronomy, the Lord gives exhortations, commandments of, "You shall do this." A perfect example of these exhortations are in Deuteronomy 5, where the 10 Commandments are retold. Now, these exhortations are notably missing from Deuteronomy in chapter 17. It is the people asking for a king rather than the Lord telling them they need it. Now, the Lord permits the people's request for a king in Deuteronomy 17, but stipulations are given for who this king must be. Now, it must be a person of the Lord's own choosing, and this person should not be a foreigner. The reason why these stipulations are given is so the king would lead people to the Lord. Now, if the king was chosen from foreigner, there is a fear that the king would lead the people into following idols. This is explained in verse 18 through 20 when naming the duties of a king. The Deuteronomist says, "And when he sits on his throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law," that is, presumably material found in Deuteronomy, "approved by the Levitical priest. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping the words of this law and these statutes, in doing them, that his heart may not be lifted above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. Now, according to the Deuteronomist, the ideal king is one who is a Torah scholar. He has the responsibility to make for himself the copy of the law so that he may be able to teach the people. The primary objective for a king is serving the Lord, not expanding his wealth or political influence. The moment the king abandons his adherence to the Torah, he is abandoning his duties as king. Now, sadly, the ideals put forth by the Deuteronomists for a king are impossible to keep. Or at least that's what the rest of the Old Testament tells us. In 1 Samuel, the people come to Samuel, petitioning him to anoint a king over them, just like the Deuteronomist said. Now, the reason for wanting a king was so that they might become like the other nations. Now, Samuel is hesitant to grant their request, but receives the go-ahead from the Lord. The Lord tells Samuel in 1 Samuel 8, verse 7, "Obey the voice of the people in all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them." According to Samuel, the establishment of a king over Israel is directly proportionate to their rejection as the Lord as their king. Samuel goes on to warn Israel of all the consequences of establishing a king over them. The king that they want will end up establishing an army, taking their wives, taking their harvest, and even more. Now, the king, or the people, think they want a king because they expect that this king will bring them economic prosperity, like the rest of the nations, but end up getting the exact opposite. Now, the warnings that Samuel gives in 1 Samuel 8 eventually plays out in the rest of the atrocities found in the accounts of Samuel kings. Now, there are some notable kings, such as Josiah, that attempt to turn the hearts of the people back to the Lord. But these kings are few and far between. And even if they did have a good king, the next one inevitably turns them back to idolatry again. Now, alongside the institution of kingship rises the office of prophet. Now, the role of a prophet within the Old Testament is to sort of challenge the king and challenge the injustices that the king committed against the people. Think of the prophet Nathan in 2 Samuel 12, who confronts David after committing adultery with Bathsheba. David used his influence as king to further his own agenda without considering what was right for the rest of the people. The role of the prophet was to call out the injustice that the king committed and call the people back to God. Now, ultimately, in the Old Testament, kingship fails miserably. The people end up being captured by the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Persians. They rejected the Lord, and this is where they got them. Now, this is but a 10,000-foot view of kingship in the Old Testament, and there is so much to say, but I know this video is long enough. Rather, I would like to move on to discussing what our study of kingship means in our current day. Now, we do not have a king rule over us in the United States, but we do have elected officials that govern us. As people in the United States, we have a responsibility to participate in our political systems. But as Christians, we must remember that God is the sovereign authority. God's design for Israel was for God to rule over them, not a human leader. We must remember that it was the people of Israel who wanted a human king to rule over them. It wasn't God's idea. I firmly believe that God is active in our world today. At the same time, I believe that we should be careful about talking about the way that God speaks to us. When we approach a political season in our country, such as the one that we are in, it is not uncommon for someone in my tradition to say that God somehow prophesied a particular candidate should win, and this is why Christians should vote for him. I'm very wary of this language of prophecy in our church today, since oftentimes it is used as a discussion ender. Instead of being used to invite God into a particular arena, it is often used to shut anyone with different views out. Additionally, if we look at Nathan's model of a prophet to David, his role was to speak out about the injustice that the king committed. We live in a time where some Christians use prophecy as a justification to support oppressive political forces. Such stance could not be further from the biblical model of prophecy in the Old Testament. True prophecy should always be used to bring hope for the oppressed, not marginalize them even further. A perfect political candidate does not exist. This is as true as it is for the Christian as the non-Christian. No one is going to see eye to eye on every single issue. Being Christian, though, it is our responsibility to advocate for the oppressed in our midst. I hope this video about monarchy proves helpful. If you found it interesting, feel free to subscribe, as I have more videos about the Bible and theology still to come. Look forward to seeing you.